I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined, as always, by my overturned co-host, Brett.
I am sort of a turnover when it comes to...
Turncoat.
Turncoat, pushover, whatever.
Actually, for those of you who are not watching us do this, you can do it as low as $3 a month on Patreon. You don't have to, but if you wanted to, you'd be seeing our
early
faces that were made for podcasting on the screen in front of you. And the first thing Brett does when he gets on is he flips us so that he's hierarchically higher than me. So he is an overturning co-host. He literally overturned me.
I just get used to a setup, and we've done this a couple times. We've only done it a couple times, but it's like, it feels weird. Like when we used to do side by side, whenever you were on the left, I was like, oh, I know. Weird.
To be fair, me too. When it got switched, I was like, when you watch certain social media videos and they have it on mirror image, so their hands are in the wrong place. I'm like, I can't handle this. Like, this is a mirror image.
My wife will only walk on the right side of me because it feels weird if we hold hands with
Interesting.
I guess with my left hand. It just feels weird.
That's I had not thought about that.
So we'll often switch. If we get in that, she'll like switch.
Do you just do like a merry-go-round with her to see when she recognizes that you keep moving around her? Well, here's the thing. Yes, all this talk about overturning. Just imagine a world in which the worst cases, you encounter the medical industry, which is typically where you go to get better. But instead of getting better, it ends up leading down a very dark path where a parent loses a child and then a lawsuit's brought. And you think there's vindication, and there's a hundreds of $million judgment against a hospital, a children's hospital, no less. And then the court system comes in like a truck and wha-bam, overturns a massive verdict. Today, we're obviously talking about the Maya Kowalski case that has been hitting the news recently because of this overturning of a massive verdict.
This case is... number one, a polarizing one. Those of you who've seen Take Care of Maya, very popular, award-winning documentary on Netflix, which, like most documentaries on Netflix, left out a lot of stuff. So I'll just go ahead and say, rather biased documentary. And I'll get into some of the documentary later, but there are a lot of people who feel passionate about this case. I think this is just, right off the bat, a good opportunity to point out to those of you who think that finality is not a virtue, who often talk about how it should be easier to overturn convictions in court cases. This is a good example of how devastating that is. You essentially had this weeks-long trial with all these depositions that went into it. It was a trial that was continued multiple times as various issues were going up through the appeals court. You had the trial, and however you felt about the outcome, you had an outcome, and you had this family who now they had closure and they could move on with their lives. And then what happens? It goes up through the appellate courts, as it should. And if it needs to be overturned, it needs to be overturned. But when it is overturned, even if it's a just decision, wow, just what a path
whiplash.
Of devastation.
I mean, literal whiplash.
So just something to remember. Appeals are hard for a reason, because it is a huge deal to overturn a verdict, and you certainly see that in this case. So a lot of you already know what we're talking about, but we do want to give you some facts and background. Frankly, this is a case that would be worth doing a long-form study of on the prosecutors. So we're going to give you the high points, and we're going to give it to you sort of from public reporting. Some of it is how things are portrayed in Take Care of Maya, which we'll talk about the shortcomings of that as well as we walk through this. But let's talk about the facts and the background of this case. So we start with Maya Kowalski. To put her in a frame for you, in October of 2016, when a lot of this is going on, she was 10 years old. So she's a very young girl, and she is being treated for something called complex regional pain syndrome, CRPS. She's diagnosed with this in 2015 when she's only 9 years old. And she's primarily treated by a doctor named Anthony Kirkpatrick. And Kirkpatrick was the person who diagnosed Maya with CRPS. Now, one thing that is important to know, CRPS is absolutely a real syndrome. It can affect people. It is, or at least should be, rare. It shouldn't occur that often. It's sort of like so many of these strange diseases, it's the body overreacting. It often happens after you have some sort of injury, and rather than the normal recovery process happening, you begin to have this incredible pain. So let's say you hurt your arm, this whole regional pain syndrome. Say you injure your arm, it's a regular injury, you would think it would get better. But in fact, even as the wound is healing, and the bruise is fading, the pain is getting worse and worse and worse. And to the extent that a light touch can be incredibly painful. It's one of those things that can make walking difficult, if not impossible. The thing about it, though, it is very difficult to diagnose. A lot of people believe they have it that don't, and there are a lot of doctors who tend to see it everywhere. One of the people who I think is an interesting player in this, and if you've seen Take Care of Maya, they do absolutely no background on this man at all. There is no critical analysis of him at all. Dr. Anthony Kirkpatrick. Is he a genius? Is he a quack? Is he crazy? Is he a fraud? I have no idea. What I do know is that he charges a whole lot of money to people who are being treated with this, including Maya and her family. You know, documentaries oftentimes will drop incredibly important information in a throwaway line. And there's a throwaway line in the documentary where they talk about how they could no longer afford him. So he sort of like shuffles them off to another doctor. Well, it's because he's charging so much money. He's basically, they don't have any money to pay him anymore, right? So, you know, look, a lot of these experimental, difficult treatments are expensive. Doesn't automatically mean that he is a fraud just because it's expensive. But nevertheless, he very quickly identifies that Maya had this disease. One thing that's interesting about this, and we're going to talk more about her throughout this, her mother, Beata, was a nurse. So she already had some medical knowledge, and it seems as though she came into this initial meeting with Dr. Kirkpatrick, who is a renowned expert, quote unquote, on CRPS, already believing that her daughter had it. And he confirmed that, in fact, she did.
So we're talking about this really rare disease. Dr. Kirkpatrick says your daughter has CRPS. What do you do about it? Because it's basically incurable, and it is incredibly painful, makes living just about impossible. And so Dr. Kirkpatrick recommended to Maya's parents an intense treatment with ketamine. You may have heard of ketamine. It's actually, people can abuse it as an illicit drug as well. Its use has been experimental in lots of contexts, I think including in this one.
It's kind of a hot drug now. Like, it's the cure for everything.
Right. Now you can use it for, I think, depression, anxiety. I mean, things that it was PTSD. Not originally intended for. Right. But it is a very powerful drug. And Maya is 10 at this time. So along with her mother, Beata, they pursued this ketamine infusion, including not just giving her ketamine, but actually inducing her with a ketamine coma that lasted for 5 days. And you may be thinking, that sounds kind of an unusual treatment. It was so unusual, they actually had to go to Mexico to do this 5-day ketamine coma. So at the time, Dr. Kirkpatrick told the family that it was either this treatment or, he said, quote, "It's going to be a slow, painful death." So thinking about putting your otherwise healthy 10-year-old child into a 5-day induced coma with a drug that's known as a street drug before it was used for medical purposes may seem like a kind of far off treatment until you think about what the doctor is telling the parents. They're saying not only is she going to die, it's going to be slow and painful. Those are like devastating words to any parent. But
so there's more to talk about, Alice, but it's like I'm chomping at the bit to talk about this because once again, you know, this documentary was praised to high heavens. I mean, there was a point when this documentary came out, we never really covered the case. I thought about it, but frankly didn't want to get into it because I saw what it was. At the time, it was like the ultimate mob I mean, people saw this documentary, and man, it tugs at your heartstrings.
The pitchforks came out, right?
Oh, absolutely.
They were like, "Put me in, coach. We're going to war for Maya."
This was absolutely, people were so fired up by this. But then you watch the documentary, and I would advise everyone who watched it and was really moved by it, step back, watch it again, and really think about this, because they present what Alice is presenting with no critical analysis at all. They don't have like another doctor who's like, I don't know, man, putting a 10-year-old into a 5-day coma seems like a pretty extreme thing. And ain't it weird that you can only do it in Mexico? Wonder why that is, right? Like, they just don't look at this at all. They're just like, well, she really needs this, so off to Mexico for the 5-day ketamine coma we go.
And the other phrase that's not really challenged, which should make you kind of think, that sounds a little strange, is remember, otherwise healthy. Pain is no joke. Those of us who have had chronic pain know it's very serious. But it's not like she has a collapsed lung or can no longer breathe or her blood no longer works or she's been diagnosed with a cancer that will be terminal. She has this regional pain, right? And the doctor tells the parents she's going to die a slow and painful death. Exactly how? And there's a reason why actually this syndrome is often mistaken or thought about as a psychological syndrome, because there is certainly chronic pain can certainly cause someone to go crazy. But that is a very dire thing for a doctor to say. And it's essentially a conversation stopper for a doctor to say that. Because then you're suddenly the parent who would rather let your child die a slow, painful death than to do experimental medication in another country because it may or may not be legal here. So here's another interesting fact. I think they note it in the documentary, but they don't really explore it. But those of us who've done just a little bit of math, like literally my second graders math, should cause this to have a question mark. The treatment's supposed to be very risky, as you can probably imagine. Inducing anyone into a coma for 5 days comes with risks. And there's a 50% chance of death. But the whole part of the story is weird, as it's also stated that this particular clinic that performed the procedure has never lost a patient. So when you have 50-50 odds, you would think that if they did it, they're really good at it, but it would at least be closer to having lost at least one patient. Either way, it worked out, and Maya was actually much better after this ketamine treatment.
And you know, it's funny because we have a number of doctors, pharmacists, etc., who listen to the podcast, and some of them are in the chat. And what I see from them, the ones in the chat, is the same thing that I think you saw across the board from medical professionals when they heard about this. The average person watched this documentary and was just absolutely floored by it, moved by it, passionate, enjoying it, pitchforks, all sorts. Most doctors are like, this is all crazy. Like, what are we even talking about? 50% chance of death, 5-day coma, ketamine for a child, like going to Mexico? What in the world? And once again, the documentary, it's almost like a pitch reel for this doctor. Like, the explanation for all this is just a video of like his website pitch video about how great he is and how great this treatment is and how wonderful it is and how we need to do it more and all this other stuff. There's no critical analysis of it whatsoever. We don't know whether, did Maya see other doctors? Did anyone else think this was a good idea? For all I know, and I Googled this guy a lot, you have some people who say he's one of the foremost pain experts in the country. Okay, is he? I don't know. This, to me, red flags are going up.
So you guys have heard this, but in my prosecutor days, I did a lot of Dr. Pill Mill cases. They were almost always pain clinics. Not because pain clinic doctors are in and of themselves shady. Pain, like I said, is very real. And if you are someone in pain, this is actually why you should be against pill mill doctors. They have made it more difficult to get pain management medication now. But the reason is when someone's in pain, they will do almost anything. And then you can obviously have that stream, like we see here with Maya, where you can't stop the medication. And guess what you get as a doctor? You start, even if insurance won't pay for it, even when you need to refill your medication sooner than the prescriptions allow, that doctor's there for you, but out of pocket, and it'll cost a pretty penny. These red flags, I mean, they were just glaring at me. It might be because I prosecuted a lot of pill mill doctors, but it should also kind of raise red flags to you, or at least to ask some critical thinking questions here.
So Maya and her family are told, if you do this 5-day coma and you live through it, you'll get better. Well, she does get better. Question that everyone should be asking themselves: did she get better because the treatment worked? Or did she get better because she was told she would get better? How much of this is psychological? aspect. I mean, it's interesting to me. One thing that I don't know, I thought was interesting, it was never really talked about. They call it complex regional pain syndrome. I'm not an expert on this, but typically regional means it's going to happen in the region of your injury. We don't really ever hear what the injury was that caused this. It also doesn't seem to be regional. It seems as though she has basically issues from her head to her toes. She suffers from massive headaches. Her feet are all messed up. She can't walk, et cetera, et cetera. Her hands, everything, like her whole body is basically in pain. But nevertheless, this happens and she comes back. She's much better. But then the Hurricane Matthew comes through Florida, and for some reason, this is like a trigger, and her condition worsens. And so as 2016 is continuing, at this point, the family is no longer being treated by Dr. Kirkpatrick. And so they take Maya to Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital. And once they get there, her mother is saying, hey, my daughter has this condition. The way we have treated this condition is through ketamine. You need to give her ketamine. And the hospital staff is like, whoa, I don't know about that. Ketamine for a child seems extreme. Even assuming she has this, there are all these other ways to treat it. There are other ways you can deal with this problem, not having to do ketamine. And the hospital apparently was even like, okay, fine, we'll give her like low dosages of ketamine. But she had been on incredibly high doses of ketamine, including the dose that put her into the 5-day coma. And so the low doses don't really do anything. And so her mom is pushing for this heavy level of medication. And the documentary doesn't really tell you all this, but is even pushing for levels that would put her back into a coma. And Maya says some things, which once again are not in the documentary, that make the staff wonder what's going on here. She says things like she doesn't want to lie anymore. She says things like, I'm afraid if I get better, my mother will be mad at me. So, of course, what do they start thinking? You have this mother who's really pushing this extreme therapy. You have a young girl who's suffering from a very unusual illness. I mean, if you're thinking about Gypsy Rose Blanchard, you probably should be, because it was a similar thing. This sounds like this could be Munchausen by proxy. And there's a doctor there named Sally Smith, who is the doctor who's responsible for sort of identifying abuse. She is brought in, and she thinks that's what's going on here. Now, one thing that's interesting about this may very well be Munchausen by proxy, but I would just note, once again, I feel like somebody who doesn't get enough attention here is the doctor. Because if I'm a parent, maybe it's even worse if I have a little bit of medical knowledge, and I have a doctor who tells me your daughter has this disease and she will die a slow, painful death unless she gets ketamine. You can bet I'm probably breaking down the door of the hospital saying, you need to give my daughter ketamine. I'm not going to stand here while she suffers when there's a cure and you're refusing to give it. So I don't know about the whole Munchausen by proxy thing, but what I do know is the hospital is very concerned about these extreme medical treatments that the girl is receiving and is being pushed on her, and they're concerned about the behavior of the mother, and so they're thinking this is Munchausen. Now, it is true, at least according to the documentary, a subsequent psychological evaluation, paid for by her own attorneys, by the way, showed no evidence of Munchausen. So we don't have a diagnosis of that, though it's a difficult thing to diagnose.
If you've ever been on a GLP-1 for weight loss, you may have seen results, but coming off the medication is the real challenge. Prolon's 5-day fasting mimicking diet offers a drug-free way to keep the weight off while protecting muscle and supporting fat loss. In just 5 days, Prolon activates the same fat-burning and cellular rejuvenation benefits triggered by fasting, but all without giving up real food, helping you maintain your hard-earned progress. Prolon is a plant-based nutrition program featuring soups, snacks, and beverages designed to nourish your body while keeping it in a fasting state, triggering cellular rejuvenation and renewal. And it's been developed over more than 2 decades at USC's Longevity Institute and backed by top U.S. medical centers. Prolon has been shown to support fat-focused weight loss, biological age reduction, metabolic health, skin appearance, and more.
Guys, I have been real with you about my experience with Prolon. I had huge doubts. Didn't think it would work. thought I'd hate it, heard fasting, thought this is going to be the worst 5 days of my life. I was completely wrong. When I started using Prolon in the soups and the snacks and the beverages, very quickly I began to feel something I did not expect. I enjoyed it. I had more energy. I had more focus than I'd had before. And I'm not the only one. Some of you have reached out to me about Prolon and your experience, and you've loved it too. If you are not someone who has tried this and you're interested in fasting, this is the product for you. For a limited time, Prolon is offering listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
Automate your alternative resolution program with Diversion Manager. Diversion Manager is a proven web-based software platform that automates and manages diversion programs. The platform benefits prosecutors' offices and communities by quickly disposing of system clogging, low-level crimes holding participants accountable while providing them with a second chance. Diversion Manager is used by over 600 agencies across the U.S. and provides over 30 online behavior-changing courses addressing a wide variety of traffic and misdemeanor violations and has been shown to lower recidivism rates.
Diversion Manager's advanced workflow automates screening, communication, and disposition, eliminating manual steps. It manages processes including registration, fee handling, and document upload verification, increasing productivity. Your office can dispose of hundreds of cases in a matter of minutes rather than days. If you need the support of our fully functional program, which can be configured to accommodate the automation and management of alternative programs with advanced workflow, communication, reporting, and integration with your case management system, then you need Diversion Manager. Go to diversionmanager.com/podcast to learn more and to schedule a demonstration of our fully functional platform.
Big news! Wayfair's Black Friday sale is here, early. Right now at Wayfair, get up to 70% off everything you need for the season ahead. Save on kitchen and dining, bedroom furniture and mattresses, holiday decor, and way more. Now is the time to score big, from seasonal finds to favorites you'll use all year long. Plus, with Wayfair, enjoy fast and easy shipping, with delivery in time for the holidays. Save up to 70% off early Black Friday deals. Shop now at wayfair.com.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
So, as required by law, the hospital reported this concern to authorities. Now, a judge ordered that Maya should be kept at the hospital and isolated from her family while these allegations were adjudicated. Now, she was kept in the hospital for almost 3 months. The doctors and nurses would routinely tell her that her pain was all in her head, going so far as attempting to force her to walk, despite her saying that she could not do so. She was in so much pain she couldn't walk. And, apparently they were saying, get up and walk. It's all in your head. Now, one social worker, her name was Kathy Beatty, who'd previously actually been accused of child abuse, was accused of being particularly sadistic towards Maya, telling Maya that her mother was in a mental institution and that Kathy was going to be adopting Maya. Beatty made several efforts to prevent Beata from interacting with Maya. After 87 days of being separated from her daughter and under immense pressure, for example, the hospital didn't allow Maya's mother to hug her, Maya's mom, Beata, committed suicide in 2017. She thought that she was standing in the way of Maya's freedom, and so she thought that if she killed herself, that her death would somehow result in Maya's release from the hospital. And essentially, it did. Maya was allowed to go to a specialist in Rhode Island who confirmed her diagnosis. And after 92 days apart from her family, she was released back to her father.
Now, this is where the story gets complicated, right? Because up until this point, you have sort of this, diagnosis. And I think the doctor in Rhode Island even ends up testifying for the defense. But you have this I don't know diagnosis. You have this I don't know doctor doing all this stuff. She goes to the hospital. The hospital seems to do the right thing in taking a protective posture with her, reporting this as possible abuse. But then it seems like the hospital messes up, or at least the personnel mess up. You have people who, the way to deal with this would have been to treat her as a completely innocent victim, right? If it is the case that she is fabricating her symptoms, she's not doing it consciously. Like, she believes, because she's been convinced by her mother, that she has this illness. You know, to the extent maybe she's faking some symptoms, it is to make her mother happy. It should be a loving, caring, supportive environment. And instead, it seems like you had a lot of doctors and nurses who approach this as like, kid, you need to quit. You need to stop. You need to stop lying so we can get this all figured out. You got Kathy Beatty, who I don't know. I mean, these are the allegations from Maya herself, which I don't know. I tend to believe Maya when she describes what was going on in that hospital. Now, from the perspective of the hospital, from Kathy, from Sally Smith, it's, look, we believed this mom was going to kill her daughter eventually if we didn't stop her. So yeah, when her mom was doing stuff that I thought was going to hurt her daughter, you're absolutely right. I was trying to prevent them from seeing each other. I was trying to prevent them from having contact. I was trying to prevent them from even hugging. I think most people think that was too far. But nevertheless, you have this whole situation, and it ends in this tragedy. I mean, whatever you think actually happened here, it ends in this tragedy. And look, I don't know all the facts of the case. I know what I've read about the trial and the appeal. I know what was said in the documentary, but nothing really makes me think that her mother was some sort of pernicious person in the same way as the Gypsy Rose Blanchard case. Like, that was a case where her mom was a fraudster, right? And she was doing all this horrible stuff to her daughter, arguably with her daughter's willing consent. There's a lot of people who like to argue about that, in order to get stuff, right? Get free trips to Disneyland and get free houses, all this other stuff. It seems like in this case, the mom, even if she was doing the wrong thing, it wasn't necessarily coming from like a bad place. So I feel like this is sort of a tragedy all around. Well, eventually it ends up where most tragedies end up, in court. So basically, Maya and her family sue a whole bunch of people, including some of the doctors, people like Kathy Beatty, the hospital. They sue a lot of people, and they make several claims. They claim false imprisonment for the period of time in which she was confined there, battery, because any kind of medical treatment that's either without your consent or based on a lie is a battery, medical negligence, because they're basically saying, look, you didn't treat her for what she had, intentional infliction of emotional distress, you knew what you were doing and you did it anyway, wrongful death for the death of her mother, and fraudulent billing, which is interesting. But basically, even though the hospital was, at least this is the allegation, even though the hospital was denying that that was what Maya had, when they billed the insurance company, family, everybody else, they billed it for treating this disease. And so the argument is, you know, either you thought she had it or you thought she didn't. You're kind of damned either way, right? Either you were fraudulently billing or you were lying about it when you were dealing with us. The defense is statutory immunity. This is the big one. Okay, so the hospital argues that under Florida statute section 39.2031A, they are a mandatory reporter. So if they have really any sort of reasonable belief, it's almost like reasonable suspicion that we talked about a couple episodes ago, that there is abuse going on, it is their responsibility to report. Then Child Protective Services will investigate, and eventually it's up to a judge to decide whether or not there's enough evidence to separate the parents from the children. And that because they were a mandatory reporter, they were immune from civil liability related to a good faith report of suspected child abuse and everything that followed. So she wasn't falsely imprisoned because that was a result of us reporting as we were required to do, and the judge deciding that she should be separated. Everything else, the treatment, you know, all that, we have immunity from that. And so you can't now sue us for it. That was their big defense. And then their other defenses were basically substantive, like, no, we actually treated her correctly, like that kind of thing, right? So that was the arguments that were made at trial.
And you can see especially the reason the statutory immunity piece is such a big one is because it has massive ramifications down the road, right? The reason that statute exists is because we want to protect kids, right? Legislatures were like, we would rather over-reporting than under-reporting when you suspect child abuse, because especially if you have a situation where not many people are going to see this child, maybe they don't go to school, maybe they don't participate in activities outside of the home, maybe the one opportunity someone is going to catch something suspicious is going to be when they go to the hospital. That's the idea behind the statutory immunity.
And let's just say, this is another one of those places in the law that is so tough, right? This is one we all know 1,000, sadly, cases that you've heard of before where children were in abusive situations, where people knew that should have acted and didn't act, and something tragic happened. You always say, why didn't they do something? Or where it was reported, and then Child Protective Services doesn't remove the child, and then something terrible happens. We all know these stories. And so that fine line between when you intervene and take a child from their parent, which is one of the most intrusive things a government can do, is really hard. It is really hard to draw that line. And that's what you have going on in this situation. And I'll just say another thing, and probably one of the most pernicious things, and there was a lot of pernicious stuff in this documentary. They tried to make it sound like Florida has this like privatized system and like people are making money off this. And that's just not true. They have a not-for-profit model where various nonprofits, charities, etc., are in charge of doing all of this with the children. They're funded by the government. And this was a reaction to some of all the problems we know about, where the state child protective services system, it just was overloaded. It couldn't function. It was failing miserably. And so this was one way you bring in sort of this government charity partnership to try and make this work. They're not making money off of this. That was a silly thing that they even included in the documentary. But I think it's important to clear that up because a lot of people grabbed onto that. So you have the situation where this young girl is in this very tough place, and you have a lot of doctors on the scene who are saying, look, what you've been doing to her is child abuse. You're pumping this girl full of ketamine. It's going to kill her, and we have to step in.
Right. And just as a side note, so one of my first jobs as an attorney was representing kids in abuse and neglect proceedings. Really like in this situation. Often I dealt with babies who were just born in the hospital and they did a blood test and they found drugs, for example, in the baby system, and immediately child services are called. I'm called in representing the child. And I will just note for anyone, I see a lot of chats right now with like a lot of angst about this. Yes, we want abuse reportings, but also oftentimes, the other goal, which is somewhat in tension with that really relatively lower bar for which to make a reporting, is family reunification. I think in every state, every policy, and it should be, is that if reunification is possible with the family, that is what you work towards. But it's also true that once you're in the system, once there's been a step made to remove a child, it is really hard. It is not an easy step to simply say, oh, you changed your ways. All right, pack up. Let's go home tomorrow. It is a very long and arduous process. And so we could do an entire multiple episodes about this area of law, and it's difficult because this goes to the core of human relationships and the family. People will fight wars for their children, right? And you see that's what's happening in this case as well. I know I would. And so when you have government entities or anyone who's not the parent stepping in and interfering with that relationship, there are a lot of things to consider.
And I'll say this, nobody's gotten this right. If you want to sort of out of the United States example, after you listen to this, watch Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father, and just make sure you have, a box of tissues, because that is a documentary I watched one time before I had children. I'll never watch it again. And I can't even imagine watching it now. Like when I watched it, 10 years ago, I just was like bawling during that documentary. But it's another example of how these things can go horribly wrong.
So we're not going to solve that today, but wanted to raise those for those of you who are watching this, because there's all these competing interests at issue that you have to deal with. So it is not a straightforward situation. As much as any documentary or any case or headline may tell you it is, these are probably the most complex and the most difficult of cases to deal with in the judicial system because they're matters of family and heart and blood. So this case goes to trial, and it's a long one. There's an 8-week trial in front of a jury, and the jury goes to deliberate, and then they return a verdict to the great cheer of the family in favor of the Kowalski family. And they rule in favor of the family in a big way. They award the family approximately $211.45 million in compensatory damages. $50 million in punitive damages. So the jury actually deliberated less than an hour to award this. And so total, that's about $261 million that the hospital was to pay to the family. The trial judge later remitted this award by about $47.5 million. So the judge can come in and say, okay, it wasn't fully supported. So basically the trial judge, before it ever gets appealed, knocks down the $261 million jury award to about $213 million. Still a massive, massive award, obviously, for the family.
What's the other one? It's remittitor and the one that makes you go up. What do we call that one? I remember remittitor.
I know.
But I don't remember.
I've actually never seen it go up, so I don't know. I've only ever seen a judge knock it down. And I'll say this, because over time, every jury is different, but over time, juries really have been in...
Additor. So clever.
Not subtractiture.
Add. Yeah, I should have been additor and subtractitor.
Subtractiture. Nowadays, honestly, it depends on which jurisdiction. And obviously, you have to get over the bar of the jury fighting in favor of you. But in a lot of these plaintiffs' cases, that's why there was tort reform. That was all these things. Juries would come back and be like, you can imagine this case. We have a mother who ended her life thinking that would free her child. To talk about, oh my goodness, made for movie. Sad tragedy, right? And there's obviously no amount of money that can replace a young girl's mother. You can imagine this is what the jury's thinking when they're awarding this. What's $200 million? Doesn't bring back your mother. Give her that money. That's probably some of what the jury is thinking when they award such a large amount. So in every single trial, the losing party is going to ask for a directed verdict. And that's exactly what the hospital did here. They asked the court for a directed verdict motion, but the judge denied it and allowed all the claims to go to the jury. So basically what the directed verdict is saying, there's no finding of facts that will change this. On the law, I should win. So the jury doesn't need to deliberate, because we always remember the jury is a finder of fact. The judge is a definer of the law. And so basically everything was submitted to the jury for their deliberation. The court interpreted the immunity statute very narrowly. And they did apply it because the immunity statute absolutely exists. But they apply it only to that initial abuse report and nothing else. So that's a very narrow interpretation, basically saying you can make that first report, but then do nothing else.
And this is a good example. We don't do a lot of civil cases, but this is a good example. And this is true, too, in criminal cases with jury instructions. So often, the decisions made by the court about how the law applies are going to have massive effects on the eventual outcome. Sort of a similar thing that we talked about in the Murdaugh case. You guys may recall in the Murdaugh case, you had all that wackiness with Becky, where she was doing all sorts of things she wasn't supposed to do that are probably going to end up putting her in prison for some period of time. And the question was whether or not it's going to result in his conviction being overturned, which we still don't know because it's still floating around in the appellate courts. But when they attempted to overturn that conviction on the basis of jury tampering by the foreman, we said then, this will be decided by a threshold question by the judge. The judge had to decide if a court person tampers, it's basically automatic, or do you have to prove prejudice? That question decided the case. She said you have to show prejudice. Well, once she said that, the evidence is overwhelming. They were never going to win. Now it's up in the appellate courts in South Carolina to determine whether or not she got that right. Was that the correct legal standard? Similar thing here. The immunity, it's exactly what it says. If you're immune, you're immune. If you're immune, it doesn't matter if you're in the wrong. It doesn't matter if you did a bad thing because you're immune. So if the immunity is broad, if it's like, essentially, look, if you report, now we're in reporting land, you're immune for reporting land because basically everything that happens after that is a consequence of you reporting. And we want to encourage reporting, as Alice said earlier. And because we want to encourage reporting, we want to give immunity to people who report. And we want it to be a broad immunity. So, the fact that you kept her there for 3 months is part of that. What you did during those 3 months is part of that. All of these things will be covered by the immunity. Or is it literally, were you acting maliciously when you made the report? And get immunity for the making of the report, because we want to encourage report making. But everything that happens after that, all of the natural, logical, necessary requirements and consequences of that report, there's no immunity. The judge took that position. Basically, you can't be sued for making the report, but everything that happens afterwards, fair game. And that's what goes to the appeals court. So the hospital says, look, we're not going to argue about the facts. We're not going to argue about whether or not she really had it or didn't have it, whether the jury got it right, whether they weighed the evidence correctly, whether or not they did the proper credibility determination, all those things that are really hard to win. We're going right at this judge's decision not to grant broad immunity, because in not doing that, it infects the entire trial. And if he got that wrong, the whole thing has to go. And that goes up to the Florida 2nd District Court of Appeal. And the hospital basically says, look, we are immune because we had to do this mandated reporting. Once we did the mandated reporting, we had to take part in this whole dependency process, this whole process of determining whether or not this is going on, whether or not she's endangered, whether or not the parents are responsible, all the court stuff, all of the family protective services, all of that. We had to take part in that. We had to treat her while that was going on, and we had to do it to the best of our ability. And so that should cover us. And then they also made some sufficiency of the evidence arguments, but they knew this was where it was going to go. This was where it was going to be decided.
And you can imagine that argument is compelling because otherwise the statute essentially has no teeth, right? You can report, but then you can see the terrible headline, right? Baby comes in with broken arms and bruises all over their head. You make that report like, oh, this doesn't look good. Like, parents say that he fell off the bed, but this looks like a case of child abuse. They make the report, then what? Send the child home with the parents? Because all they can do is the initial reporting. What happens? The child goes home, something devastating happens, the child doesn't make it. I mean, the uproar, right? And so you can understand where this argument is coming from. It can't possibly be that narrow of an interpretation of immunity. Otherwise, the purpose of the statute wishes to protect a child if those in a position to be able to know this is abuse or have seen it, be able to do something about it.
And look, narrow immunity for reporting means narrow reporting. It means, number one, you're going to be very circumspect about when you report. You're going to sort of impose on yourself a higher bar because you don't want to be sued. And $250 million is a devastating amount to any institution. Hospitals often have very fine lines they're working with anyway, right? That's a huge amount of money. And not only are you going to be circumspect about when you report, but if you report, the amount of information you're going to include, how full-throated you're going to be about that, how supportive you're going to be about, it's going to be low. You're going to do your bare minimum to meet the requirement under the law and the bare minimum that is covered by the immunity. And that's as far as you're going to go. That's what you're going to see. So that's going to happen. And so the whole argument is, look, that clearly wasn't what the legislature intended, and the judge got this wrong. This was a case that had an oral argument, which usually indicates this is something the court's very interested in, despite the fact there were all these other arguments, because you always make fallback arguments. But the real focus of the oral argument was whether or not the judge had improperly limited the scope of immunity just to the act of reporting, rather than encompassing essentially everything that happened once the report is filed. And on October 29th, 2025, that would be yesterday, as we record this, the Court of Appeal issued its decision and reversed the $213 million judgment. They concluded that the hospital was indeed entitled to immunity and that it was a broad immunity. So exactly how that's going to play out, we'll find out later. But basically, they held that the plain language of the statute extends immunity not only to the initial report of suspected abuse, but also to subsequent participation in any sort of legal proceedings and any sort of protective custody actions, and many of the actions you would, of course, have to take once someone is in your custody, as happened here with Maya.
So the court determined that several of the family's claims, particularly the false imprisonment, battery, and portions of the IIED claims, emotional distress, basically all of those things that were based on the treatment after the reporting, were based on conduct directly tied to the hospital's cooperation with the court-ordered dependency proceeding, and thus they were statutorily protected. Let's go through each of those. It makes sense, right? If this immunity is broad and everything they did to effectuate the court order was protected or had statutory immunity, then there isn't false imprisonment because they're not holding Maya against her will. They are, well, might be against her will, but against the law because they are just effectuating a court order that flows from that mandatory reporting requirement that has statutory immunity for the hospital. The battery is based on the treatment of her because she's still sick, right? There's something wrong with her. So treatment of her, this is kind of, we think of battery in the sense of like, if I hit Brett, that's battery when you make contact with someone. But also in medicine, basically, if someone comes in and the doctor like removes your kidney and should have only operated on your uterus or something, that's battery as well. And so when it comes to medicine, it's actually anything that is treatment on your body. So there's no battery because they're treating her for illnesses because she is in their care. And then the intentional infliction of emotional harm, basically just the emotional side of it, was all part of keeping with the order. That they had to keep the mother from hugging her. That was not them being cruel, but this is the argument of why it needs to be readjudicated or is not going to uphold this particular jury verdict, is all part of the order from the court. Now, as a result, the appellate panel vacated the judgment and remanded the case for retrial, limited to potential non-immune claims. So they brought a lot of claims, but they're saying any of the non-immune claims, you can still have a trial on it. And that includes medical negligence and also other emotional claims that are based on conduct outside of the statutory scope of immunity. So maybe if this happened, saying, I'm going to adopt you. You're my child now. That probably falls outside of the statutory immunity, right? So there's like, it's not like everything that Beatty said, for example, falls under immunity. Some of these allegations are pretty wild, and you can see how they would fall outside of the statutory protection.
And I hope you can see how this is a really good ruling. Initially, I think a lot of people were very upset by this because Maya is an incredibly sympathetic victim. Because she absolutely is a victim. She's entirely a victim in this. You know, when the documentary was being made, she was 17 years old. She's a young woman who has been through immense emotional strain. She lost her mother. All of this happened to her. It's just terrible. You can't watch the documentary and not just feel so bad for her. And it doesn't even really matter what the facts are. She suffered regardless, right? I mean, she is just the ultimate victim in this because no matter what the truth is, she's a victim, no matter what. And the thing about this is this decision, on the one hand, does a very important thing. It protects so many people out there who are mandatory reporters, who are required by law to report these things, who, if they don't report it, can be sued, can be fired, can lose their license. All sorts of bad things can happen to them if they don't report. But this lawsuit said, and guess what? All sorts of bad things can happen to you if you do report, even if your report's in good faith. Even if the report itself is immune, we can still sue you. We can still make you sit for hours of depositions. We can still make you hire an attorney. All these things, even if you win, are devastating to the average person, both in terms of their life, their finances, the stress, all this stuff, right? This opinion basically says anything encompassed within that reporting, you're not going to be sued for. All of you mandatory reporters out there, you're not going to be sued because you reported in good faith and then a bad thing happened. You're not going to be sued for that. Now, if you could otherwise be sued, you're the hospital, and you act negligently in your medical care, you don't get immunity for that because that's something unrelated to the reporting. You know, if you messed up her medical care, that's not because you reported. We're not going to go that far. Or like Alice said, some of the more salacious accusations. Yeah. Those things might also be things you could still be sued for. You're not going to get immunity for that. But the things related to your protection of a child as required by law, you're going to get immunity for that. And the lawsuit should proceed based on that narrower grounds. And this is why it's so important to have really good trial level judges. And so many of us live in states where trial judges are elected. Florida's one of them, I think. I don't know. I don't know if trial judges are elected in Florida. They certainly are in Alabama, right? And this decision, what I think was a poor decision by the trial judge, the easy thing to do is what he did. That was the easy thing to do. The hard thing to do would be to really grapple with these issues and narrow them. If he had done that, let's imagine a world in which he had narrowed this and he said, look, sorry, you're not going to be able to pursue that. Medical negligence, intentional infliction of emotional distress, absolutely. And then they win a $50 million judgment or a $75 million judgment. The appeals court doesn't overturn that. The case is over. They're made whole. The hospital is punished for the bad things they did. They're protected for the good things they did. And we all move forward. But that didn't happen. And so that's why we're where we're at.
So the appellate court further ruled that punitive damages, punitive meant to punish, were improperly presented to the jury because the record did not contain clear and convincing evidence of willful or malicious misconduct as required by Florida law. It also found insufficient proof to sustain the fraudulent billing and wrongful death claims. So basically it was like a win across the board for the hospital. But what you saw, of course, is that, wow, $213 million verdict overturned. They have to start all over again.
And so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens. But really, this is about that mandatory reporting. This is like the Redonda Vault case that we had covered on the prosecutor's podcast with the nurse who was charged with manslaughter, murder, because she was not actually trying to murder someone. She mixed up medications that ended up killing one of her patients, and how that had massive ramifications because of what it would do to, in this case, mandatory reporters. This is a good decision for mandatory reporters. I see many people in the chat right now saying, I've made dozens of mandatory reporting reports over the years and never once thought about getting sued. You would now, certainly if this stood, right? Counselors, basically anyone who comes in contact with kids have some sort of probably mandatory reporting. And that's because we want eyes and ears to be out there for kids who typically are at a diminished ability to speak outside of, say, their home, especially younger children. So this would have had, and probably still has, a chilling effect on mandatory reporters, even with the overturned verdict, because look, it went to an 8-week trial. The hospital was not put in a good light, still not put in a good light. There's an entire documentary shot about it. So even though this is overturned, I can promise you this has had a chilling effect already. But we'll see what happens specifically in Maya's case with respect to whether they're going to try again the other cases and what allegations come to bear there.
So they should settle, number one. Everybody involved should settle. There were some things done in this case that shouldn't have happened. The hospital should accept some responsibility for that. There should be a settlement. I have no doubt that that's what should happen. I hope that's what the parties will do. I do want to discuss briefly the documentary, just because I think it is a good example of what's wrong with documentaries and just some pointers, right? As you're watching these, it is so easy. I watched this documentary today because I wanted to see it before we talked about this. And I had not seen it. I had followed this case when it was in the trial, but I had not seen the documentary. And I watched the documentary and I felt the same sort of emotional. I was manipulated emotionally, just like many people, which is what's supposed to happen. And I was upset and I was sad and everything else. And then the end of it, I was like, wait a second. There are so many problems with this. We've talked about some of the red flags, but I want to talk about a few more. Think about this for a second. Look, I have no doubt that there are people who work at a children's hospital who don't actually care about kids. I'm sure there's some people who do that, right? I'm sure there's some people who are not good doctors, who are lax in what they do. I'm sure that's true. The documentary presents this as if the entire hospital, all the doctors, the nurses, the social workers, the doctor who's in charge of determining whether or not there is a potential for abuse, all these people are these cold-hearted, hate-filled people who just want to separate Maya from her mother for no apparent reason. That's how they present them. You know that's not true. You know it's not true. You know that there were a ton of people, including some of the people who were named in that documentary, who care deeply about children and who care a lot about ensuring that children are not abused. That's something they care about. And that was a position. This documentary could have been so much better because this is a tough issue. And you could have done such a great, like, here's Maya's position and her family's position. But here's the position of the doctors and the nurses, and listen to them. Hear what they say. Hear why they were concerned. Listen to why they thought this young girl could be killed if this continued. Her parents had already admitted to sending her to Mexico for a treatment with a 50% chance of death, right? That's what they were dealing with. And think about the things, to the extent you think they are a little jaded, there's a reason for that. Think about the horrors that you see at a children's hospital dealing with kids who come in and they have, forget the fracture on your arm that you only get when somebody like grabs you and jerks you, or the bruises, the abuse, the sexual abuse, all the horrible things that people do to kids. I'm sure they are, to a certain extent, a little bit hardened by that, right? But you'll never convince me that all those people didn't think that they were doing the right thing by Maya by reporting this case and at least separating her from her family while they determined what was going on. You won't convince me of that. Now, the documentary tried. But my advice is, when you're watching documentaries like this, look for stuff like that. Look for how they're manipulating you emotionally to make you stop thinking logically so that you'll get behind whatever the train is that they want to run uncontrolled. And look, the fact that this documentary came out right as a trial where the defense attorneys were seeking $250 million, you got to wonder, there's a coincidence there, right? So never forget about the money that's involved here. And that's what I have to say about the documentary. That'll probably be controversial to some people. I'm going to recommend a podcast I haven't listened to, which I don't normally do. But so many people have praised it. I'm going to listen to it now that I've watched the documentary. It's called Nobody Should Believe Me. They did an entire series on this case. I am led to believe they go into a lot of detail about this case, about a lot more information than is certainly available in documentary. So I'm going to say check that out. Let me know if that was terrible advice. I'm going to listen to it. If I listen to the whole thing and think it's terrible, I'll let you know. But nobody should believe me. Apparently, the whole podcast is about Munchausen by proxy, which I will continue to call it that, not facetious disorder imposed on another, or whatever it is.
I just learned how to say Munchausen. Don't make me learn how to say another one.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah,
third
spiral
co-host
fractures.
mispronunciations coming back. No, I think that's exactly right. And look, I think documentaries do a very good job raising awareness for certain cases, and I learned a lot here. But what Brett said there, if there's a question mark, don't take everything that's fed to you. I used to think documentaries, it's all fact-based. They're still telling a story, and there's still going to be an angle. That's okay. Like we say, everyone views things in a certain angle, but when there are real questions here that could have massive ramifications for an entire, not just this hospital, but all mandatory reporters, they are worthy of being grappled with instead of just arguing with emotion based on one anecdotal case. This case was a hard one. That's why it actually makes it for a very good documentary. Well, I hope you guys have liked this episode, and you can always let us know what you think at prosecutorspod@gmail.com. And if you leave a 5-star review, you get to ask any question. It doesn't even have to be about true crime or the news or the law. In fact, those are some of the best questions we get. Brett, do you want to answer a question now? Do we have time?
Sure, why not? I always have time.
We can't tell people they get to
It's All Hallows
ask a question
Eve.
and then we don't. It is All Hallows Eve.
So exciting. If you're in the chat, we're going to watch that movie in the Discord. You can watch it with us. Don't call its name, I think. Don't say its name. Something like that.
Terrifying.
Are you going to watch it with us? Yeah?
No.
Oh,
I'll watch a Hallmark Christmas movie at the same time.
See, Christmas starts for me Sunday. Or Saturday. Christmas starts. I guess, Saturday's All Saints Day, right? Or All Souls Day. It's All Saints Day?
That's All Saints. The next
day
is
Sunday is All Souls Day?
Yeah.
So I usually try and get through those before I end my Halloween celebrations.
It's the weekend. You get to take the whole weekend.
Halloween on the weekend. Somebody asked me, I was in another podcast, and somebody asked, if you could make a law, what would it be? And my law was Halloween would be a holiday, as would be the day after Halloween.
Oh.
So, national holiday.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay, so this one's for me. This is Walbarn. Walbarn wants to know, Brett, did you listen to Art Bell in the 90s and 2000s? Your October episodes remind me of the late nights I've listened to Art Bell while studying for college exams. I love Art Bell. Art Bell was amazing. Coast to Coast AM. My wife and I, whenever we would be on late night drives, they still play it. They'll play like the archived, because unfortunately Art Bell has passed away. I mean, Nuri does a great job, but it's not as good as Art Bell. And you can still listen to it. Just classic paranormal stuff. I mean, Mel's Hole, just so many great stories from that. So I loved it. Worth listening to if you get a chance. I mean, I'm sure Alice was all about Coast to Coast AM.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I figured you were. Okay, let's do one that we can both answer. Let's see. Well, this one fits with this. This is Artistry of Jupiter, which is a beautiful name. I'm a licensed social worker. Working on my certification, my goal is to work in criminal justice, preferably juvenile justice. So I've been doing some research into possibilities. My question is, do you guys ever work with social workers? And if so, in what capacity? So in the federal system, we really don't prosecute juveniles because of some weird quirks in the law. But where social workers will often see them are in the child exploitation cases. Often see social workers who have a lot of really important evidence and information because they do initial interviews. I mean, look, you talk about like angels in disguise. Social work, you don't make much money, barely any. You're dealing with the most difficult cases imaginable. Nobody praises you or like puts you on a pedestal, but you are doing the Lord's work because there's not enough of you. And there's so many people who need that assistance in navigating, whether it's the criminal justice system or navigating their own sort of attempting to get justice for themselves. So I would say, if that's what you're passionate about, we need more people like you who are passionate about it, and keep going.
I've not in my current law jobs, or prosecutor jobs either, but I've worked with social workers in two contexts. One, when I was representing children in abuse and neglect proceedings, obviously worked with social workers. They were angels on earth. Quite literally, it felt like the whole world was stacked against these kids, except for their social worker, and I'd like to think those of us who were representing them. And then in the rare occasions when we had the world's best foster family, if you have the means to become foster certified or even do respite care, it is literally being an angel on earth to a lot of people. Get certified. It is a headache. All the regulations in place are obviously to protect the kids, but it is definitely a headache to get certified. Do it if you can. Those were basically the only people I could look to in some of the darkest times, because talk about vicarious trauma. I've never done anything harder than representing kids in abuse and neglect proceedings, because you see the darkest things. And that's what the social workers looked at every single day. I did that like a slice of the time, because then I'm spending my time on legal arguments, writing briefs, going to court. The social workers, I can't imagine the type of boundaries they have to put up internally in order to make it day to day, because you can't help but take these things personally because they reach to like the very core of humanity. So I had such immense respect for those were children's social workers, so anyone like 18 and under. And then I worked for a nonprofit that worked with adults who were in like full care systems. So they typically were not able to live alone because of either mental incapacity or other sorts of ailments where their families couldn't care for them. And so they were cared for essentially by the state, and they had social workers assigned to them. So those were adult social workers. They were also angels on earth because the creativity that they brought to their job, if you want to be a problem solver and you want to literally make the world a better place, that is absolutely a calling. It has to be a calling because it is exhausting, oftentimes thankless, but so needed. And what I learned from those two positions is we do not have enough social workers. Every social worker I've ever worked with have been some of the most incredible professionals I've ever worked with. So I have to think self-selection gets the most amazing personalities into those professions, but because they are so demanding, people burn out pretty quickly. And so if you're doing it, support to you, but also make sure to take care of yourself, because if you're doing it, you're probably the type of person who needs to do it, and we need longevity from you. So take care of yourself.
So that was so passionate and wonderful an answer that we probably should end on it, but I don't want to do that. I want to ask one more question, because this has been a heavy episode, and I feel like this is a nice sort of light way to send us off until next week. So this is from Jen B, and Jen B wants to know, do either of you rely on a particular uniform or outfit formula for court or trials? What about on the weekends? For example, do you prefer a certain style of pants, a specific blazer, or maybe even certain colors to feel your best and most confident? What clothing or trends do you gravitate towards on the weekends? So there you go, Alice.
I love that question.
That's a great question.
Do you know why I love that question? We've talked about in other episodes where it's like, how do you get things done when you have like responsibilities in your personal life, your families and everything? And one of the ways that I make my life go around right now is clothing. And I don't quite go the route of,
Quince
Mark Zuckerberg, where you have like 3 t-shirts and 2 pairs of pants and that's all you wear. Like, I understand the mental load of taking that off, but basically that's what I do for court clothes. So this is not a paid ad, but essentially I wear like Quince style clothing. So Quince is like, they do professional wear, but it's non-frilly, I guess is the best. Like MM LaFleur does that as well, where they're maybe a little bit more expensive, but they're very plain. So you can change out what it looks like. So I have a navy dress, a black dress, and then I have a million blazers that go with them. And I keep those blazers on rotation. When I worked at the prosecutor's office, I just had a closet of blazers. And they would go with, and I would have navy shoes and black shoes. And I buy the same pumps every year. I buy new ones for my trials. They always the same ones, so that, because I've done this before where I grab 2 different shoes. If I grab 2 different shoes, the worst thing I can do is at least they're the same style and one might be blue and one might be black. But I try to make it as minimal as possible. I'm not winning any fashion awards whatsoever. But when you are, say, a prosecutor literally running to court multiple times a day, that for me was necessary because it was comfortable enough that I could work all day in case I had no court hearings. But if a judge ordered a hearing in an hour, I was ready to go with my heels and my blazer behind the door, and I could run across to the courtroom. That's what I do I'll answer that part and let you answer work.
So, well, I'll say this. I am basically a slob. So those of you who watch us record these podcasts know what I wear. During the summer, I'm going to be wearing a t-shirt and jeans. In the winter, I got the quarter zip and jeans. That's what I wear. That's what I prefer. I don't get dressed up if I'm not doing something official. You're not going to see me in like even really business casual on an average day. It's just not, I just have no desire to do that. So in court, I really like boots. So really the boots define things. So I have a lot of nice boots. Like I have one pair of boots that's made out of elephant skin. I have another pair of boots that's made out of blue lizard. Another one that's made out of caiman, right? And so the elephant skin boots are like the fanciest. So that's like, maybe an oral argument. I'll wear those. Just a standard day in court. It's probably going to be the caiman. If it's a trial, probably going to go with the blue lizard because they're blue, a little fancier. When I worked in the Eastern District of Virginia, my mentor there, who we hated each other. I mean, I hate to say we hated each other, but we yelled at each other. I mean, it was like we had a very contentious relationship. But he was actually like, I learned a lot from the guy, despite the fact that we literally would like scream at each other. He once told me that whenever he had a jury trial, he always wore a tie with a dog on it. So he had like this tie with this huge like cartoon dog on it. And he's like, jurors love dogs. So you wear the dog tie and they see the dog tie and they instantly like you and you automatically have credibility. So I always try and wear like some sort of tie that has like an animal on it or something.
That's hilarious.
If it's a jury thing. Yeah.
That's kitschy, but probably works.
Yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely, and he was very successful. He was a very successful prosecutor. So I always go with that.
So on the weekends, I am it's max comfort because I'm running after kids, like usually from sunup to well after sundown. So I'm an athleisure all day long. I love shorts because we live in a hot climate, and I pretty much look like a slob on the weekends. Here's the thing: now that enough of
she
you
never
have,
looks like a slob.
I do look like a slob.
No, she doesn't.
I really do. You can ask Mrs. Brett. Whenever she stops by, I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. I look like I'm half dead. But now enough of you have like mentioned that you've seen me at Costco.
And now she gets dressed up for Costco.
No,
Good work.
No, I don't get dressed up for Costco. But this is kind of a side note. It has nothing to do with what I wear. Oh, I buy a lot of clothes at Costco. Let's be clear about that. I love Costco clothes. But now enough of you have mentioned that you've seen me at Costco that when I'm at Costco, it used to be my safe place. I didn't think anyone was watching me. That whenever someone smiles at me, and we live in a friendly town, people just smile because that's what you do in this town. Every time someone smiles at me, I immediately think, oh God, what am I wearing? Is this someone from the gallery?
I've become very suspicious of people who seem overly friendly.
Yes.
But don't say anything. I'm like,
wait a second.
You're not saying anything.
I almost would rather you just say it because
like
then
I went to the doctor today, and
Go ahead.
if you're this person, I went to the doctor today, and there was one nurse who was like, there was something about the way we interacted that I was like, you listen to the podcast. You don't want to say anything, but you listen to it.
Was it at the pediatrician or a doctor for you?
It was a doctor for me. It was a doctor.
Okay, because I was going to say the pediatrician's office that at least I go to, a nurse listens, and I realized that after the fact.
I'll say this. I just want to make clear. I don't want to get any Alice cutting off the heads of chickens reviews about my elephant skin boots. So
they died a peaceful death. They died a peaceful death.
They died naturally. So there's this place in Utah that they used to provide all of the boots, belt buckles, really all the leather stuff for Yellowstone, the show Yellowstone. And I always stop in there whenever I'm in Utah because they got so much awesome stuff.
Wait, we went there together, right?
Yeah, we have.
That they did stuff for Yellowstone?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
yeah,
I didn't know that. We actually went there a good number of times together.
Yeah. Burns, for those of you who are familiar with this kind of stuff. They've been around for 100 years. And I was in there. I got my blue lizard skin boots, which are awesome.
They are awesome.
But they were like, we have some more exotic things too. I mean, we have ostrich, we have rhinoceros, we have hippos. And we have elephant. And we have giraffe. And I was like, is that legal? And they're like, actually, you have to get on a waiting list. And basically, when an elephant dies in like Kenya of natural causes, they'll get some leather to work with. And so I got on the list. It was like a year and a half later. They called me like, hey, elephant died. Do you still want these boots? And I was like, yep. And so they made the boots and shipped them to me. It's pretty awesome. They're awesome.
So it was like made to order.
Oh, yeah. They measured my foot and everything.
Wow.
All of their boots are handmade.
That's really cool.
So, yeah.
No, I've seen your boots. They look awesome. I didn't realize that yours were like you had to wait for the elephant to die and then you got your boots.
Yeah, it was nice. Worked out.
Now I kind of want some. Now that I know it's so humane.
My boots probably saved more elephants' lives than anything anyone listening's done because I'm sure that money went to a good cause.
Oh, my goodness. Well, guys, this has been great. You see how fun these questions are. Write in your questions at prosecutorspod@gmail.com. You can find us on all the social medias and let us know what you want to listen to on Legal Briefs. We are here to not necessarily please, but we will talk about what you want us to talk about. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Kowalski?
Yes.
Kowalski. Someone who recently started listening to our podcast but is a friend texted me, was like, just by the way, this is how you pronounce this word. And I said, oh, friend.
Get ready.
Oh, friend. Let me just tell you, we have a third co-host and her name is Mispronunciation.
I love it when everybody's like, just so you know, the name of this random place in my state
is completely wrong. Do you even call yourself podcasters?
Sorry.
I'm like, I do my best.
Sorry, you don't know how to pronounce words.
I do
it's not
my
fault.
best.
This October, Fear is free on Pluto TV with horror movie collections from Paranormal Activity, The Ring,
You will die in 7 days.
Scream, and From Dusk Till Dawn.
This is my kind of place.
And don't miss the man-made nightmares in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or the world-ending chaos in 28 Days Later.
Something in the blood.
All the scares, all for free. Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.
With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 350 plus undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.